All right, start off. My name is Tim Jahraus. I'm a super senior here at UND, 5th year. I'm an environmental geoscience student, and I'm also a 422 student here in this class. I'd like to talk to you today about dendrochronology, which is essentially aging a tree by looking at its rings. Dendro referring roughly at least to trees, and chronology kind of means aging, I believe. So to start off, the importance of it, by looking at the growth of a tree, you can gauge the quality of the environment that it grew up in, and you can actually break it down into a series of years. So you can find where there was maybe a dry spell or a tough time for that tree to grow in, and then other times where it grew really well for any span of years. And this can tell you, you can actually pick up on impacts that may be anthropogenic, man-caused, or maybe it could have been natural causes too. It gives you a timeline in which you can kind of gauge what that tree had to live through. History, I imagine the first types of dendrochronology gauging would have been chopping the tree down. You get a real good look at the rings and how it grew, and then it dies. So you effectively end it. Now what they do is you have a little, like a drill, where you actually bore into the tree, and you're able to extract a tree core. I have 2 of them right here that we glued onto pieces of wood, and you can very effectively see, especially on this one, that the core itself of the tree is right here, and you see successive rings going out, and then right here we'd have the bark. On this one it's right here. And you can kind of gauge based on the width of the rings just how well it grew in any given period of time. We got these out at Chippewa National Park in northern Minnesota, just past Bemidji. And what we did was we were looking at a few different species of trees. I don't know if it says on here what kind. This is from a trembling aspen, and this one, we don't know. But the interesting thing that we did with this class was we took core samples from down below in a bog where it was very undisturbed, pristine habitat, and I believe this one back there. Somewhat near a road, but it wasn't too close to any disturbances, whereas this one was right on the edge of a gravel pit. And so we were able to compare between species. We have a tough time comparing these 2 in particular, but we did have others with matching species and matching and differing habitat. We were able to compare width of tree rings, and it was actually quite evident. The ones that grew up near that gravel pit were, you could certainly see the disturbances within the environment that it grew up in. Very narrow tree rings as opposed to those found in undisturbed habitat at very wide rings, and grew much larger overall. And yeah, just to talk about the process we went through to collect these. Just stick that thing up to a tree, you kind of bore in, kind of pulls it out, and they're very fragile, so we tried to glue them into these little grooves set in wood, and you can tell the one I did, that's this one right here, looks awful, because I'm not very careful when I handle fragile things, whereas I think this was from a geography student. She did a much better job, and it's pretty well intact. And yeah, I guess the importance of this overall is just it's one unique and fairly effective way of looking at anthropogenic or natural causes to changes in the environment. And it gives you a little window on how you can detect whether conditions have improved or deteriorated over time, and it's a good window overall. So I'll leave it at that. Does anyone have any questions at all on these processes? Thanks.
What do you mean by disturbance?
Disturbances can range anywhere from, in Chippewa, the two that we saw for the most part was that gravel pit. It was right up against that tree, and that clearly would have affected capillary action from the groundwater, and so that tree would have experienced much less water source once that pit was put in place. It could have also created, to an extent, ground erosion. I don't think the erosion affected the tree at all, and the tree would have, the root system would have mitigated that to a point. I don't think that in itself affected the tree, but loss of a water source especially was a big thing. And then the other one we saw was a road system built in, and we looked at, I believe it was, I think that's where I got the I think that's where I got the trembling aspen core, was we were looking for an undisturbed area somewhat near the road, but the road forked at a point, and so we couldn't really find a place that was far enough from the roads, but that could have been another disturbance. As far as natural disturbances, it could be, I don't know off the top of my head, I don't know, it could be something very random like a meteor coming through and ripping the place apart. I don't know, anything. Beavers. You know, if a group of beavers move in and they dam an area up, that's definitely going to throw everything off and could very well change the ecosystem, both flora and fauna-wise. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Where do you get these samples from? Like, is there a particular spot you like to go from?
Yeah, well, in our situation, we the gravel pit was much farther uphill, whereas the undisturbed area was much farther down, kind of in a bog area, right up along the water's edge. And so elevation-wise, there was a lot of difference. I suppose that would also make a difference if we were just looking at the water table. It would be much, well, depending on the species, it would probably be more suitable for certain trees down below where the water table is going to be much closer to the surface, as opposed to higher elevations, it's going to be much deeper. So yeah, that could play a factor. In our specific case, though, it did play a little bit of a factor, I guess. We could have gone farther up the hill, but we chose to find the best conditions possible for those trees, and then the worst conditions possible, which did include elevation in the end. But for the most part, we were looking at that gravel pit, a little bit about the roads, and then that bog over there. All right.
Does this relate to your thesis at all?
Not directly. My thesis is looking at soil erosion inside prairie dog towns, and then comparing it to soil erosion rates just adjacent to the prairie dog town in pristine habitat, void of any prairie dog impacts. Indirectly, yes, because the vegetation and the amount of vegetation, and also the species, is completely different within that prairie dog town compared to that adjacent area. The distance apart is maybe a quarter mile away, but we're looking at thick vegetation, mostly natural prairie grasses that are up to 1 foot tall, and like I want to emphasize how thick it is there, as opposed to that prairie dog town where it's very patchy. The grass that does grow in there it looks kind of like a well manicured lawn because the prairie dogs keep it down so short. But there are a lot of bare spots, and so there's massive amounts of erosion going on inside the prairie dog town as opposed to outside the dog town. So indirectly, yeah, there's a lot of relationship between the two.
What questions do you have for the class?
Good question. 2 questions would be, how vaguely describe how we went about collecting these core samples. Describe the tool we used, the process we did to extract it out of the tree. You can be vague on that. I don't think you need a lot of detail to describe it. The second question I would say is, why is dendrochronology relevant to our business. Just give one reason. All right, 10 minutes, perfect.